Welcome everyone to the first episode of Raw Sports with myself, Ahmed El Houli, and my co-host, Mr. Tony Sheehan. Mr. Tony, how are you, buddy? How's things?
Ahmed, good morning. Another great Monday morning here in Sydney. We know that you're in Melbourne and we can't wait to get stuck into the first Raw Sports.
Absolutely, Tony. Let's get kick-started straight away. The biggest event over the weekend, the UFC in Las Vegas. It was titled as the Aussie takeover of the UFC in Vegas. We had a few Aussies on the card. We had actually 5 scheduled. We had Alex Volkanovski, Robert Whittaker, Jimmy Crew, Shannon Ross, and Jack Della. Unfortunately, Jack Della's fight was cancelled for a second time straight. But the other 4 fought. Not the best night for the Aussies. Alex Volkanovski defended his featherweight title, and he did it in sensational fashion. Robert Whittaker lost, unfortunately. I think that is pretty much the end of him. Jimmy Crew and Shannon Ross, not the best of nights. Give us your take, mate.
I thought it was a really interesting day. It's, as you said, disappointing about Robert Whittaker going down to the South African Duplessis, but Duplessis was the bigger, better fighter on the day. As we know, Volkanovski, just a supreme fighter, and Dana White, the chairman of the UFC, said as much afterwards. And he just the ability to woo the crowds, to be a great fighter, to do it in front of the man Donald Trump, the former president and the future president, and a host of other celebrities in Vegas at T-Mobile Arena was just sensational.
Absolutely. So let's look at the UFC and the relationship it's had with Australia and Australian fighters and Australian fight fans. Dana White made some interesting comments in his post-fight press conference. He said, Australia is a big market for us in terms of pay-per-view numbers. The last 3 events that they've come out to have been sold out. When Ronda Rousey fought in 2014, she sold 57,000 tickets at today's Marvel Stadium. The UFC has had amazing success in Australia. Now, all this success has come on the back of no real structure, no real pathway for fighters to pretty much say, okay, I want to become a UFC fighter. What happens now? Where do I go? And how do I end up in the UFC? There's local promotions like Hex Fight Series and a few others. Yes, but it's still very unstructured, all over the place. And a lot of these fight promotions are just drowning in losses year after year, where we see in other countries like what's happening in China, what's happening in Vegas. They built the PIs, the Performance Institutes, and now they look to expand into other countries. But Australia, one of the core UFC audiences, really has no structure.
Yeah, but just because we have a huge PPV, a pay-per-view consumer base here in Australia and New Zealand, that doesn't mean or equates to participation. So obviously like the AFL or the NRL pathway programs, or be it tennis or soccer, they start from a very young age and it's bred into them, usually through their families and all their surroundings, whereas the UFC is a very unique and niche sport. I mean, it is enormous worldwide, we know that. But the uptake and participation is so minute, and that's either something that we have to look at or accept.
Yeah, but Tony, what we're talking about here is look at the numbers that we've seen at the last 3 events, or any event that the UFC has held in Australia. Sellout after sellout after sellout. So clearly there's an appetite for it. There's success now on the international scene with Volkanovski, with Whittaker, with Tavasu, with Mark Hunt before them. Like, there's multiple fighters that are coming out of this small country, and they're really performing on the world stage with no real pathway or infrastructure.
Yeah, but hence that goes back to my previous point. Do we want to watch it as a consumer, or do we want to participate? So that's something that either the current crop of parents or parents to be either wants or doesn't want. I mean, I think a lot of people, the newfound athlete is not as hard as what we've been bred in the past. I mean, if you look at AFL and NRL, the amount of clashes that the boys used to take on during a game was, almost insurmountable. It was just the body-on-body contact was rough and it was tough. And now we have governing bodies worried about CTE and bone breakage, and our contact sports are largely becoming a lot like basketball.
Yes and no, because if you look at the gyms that are popping up left, right, and center, there's now UFC gyms, private gyms, BJJ, martial arts gyms popping up everywhere, all over the country. Now, they're not opening to just, to pay rent. Their numbers are huge. There's a demand, especially in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
But is there?
There is. Look at the numbers and see.
Well, I don't know what the numbers are.
Well, that's my point. So, if there was a structured pathway for these fighters, there's the amateur associations that have pushed these different fight leagues in the country. The MMA Amateur Association, which is previously run by a good friend of mine, Ed Bavlock. They did their part, but even then, when you talk to him, he'll tell you there's a huge lack in funding compared to other sports.
So now, what would you like to see change?
More funding from government, more infrastructure built around these martial arts. Why is the government pulling away from martial arts? Do we want strong Australians who display Aussie character and passion on the international stage, or do we want people just to stay here and just, play footy or rugby? Like, at the end of the day, when they go fighting these tournaments around the world, amongst thousands of athletes, they're holding the Australian flag. They're representing us.
They may be. Oh, look, I don't have an answer to your query. I mean, the state government has been, pretty good actually in terms of seeking those big entertainment fights that we see at Marvel Stadium. But in terms of the pathway, maybe they don't want to support that.
But the big entertainment fights is because it brings people to the state. It's tourism dollars. I mean, the Victorian state government, for God's sake, gave Netball Australia $15 million. And everyone knows that's a flop at the end of the day, whether we like it or not. That's the only way that they're looking at it. We're talking about the development of the sport that's producing these international figures. Who knew Alex Volkanovski before he fought in the UFC? Who knew Robert Whittaker before he fought in the UFC? Who knew Mark Hunt before he fought in the UFC? He used to go fight in Japan in pride.
Well, Mark Hunt was a sort of a relative well-known person, but Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, has invested a lot of money and is now going to host the UFC, I think it's 293 or 5 in Sydney, September 8. So, yes, the state governments are invested because they know it's entertainment and it's huge for the tourism economy.
That's tourism dollars. We're talking about infrastructure and pathways.
Yeah, well that's not something I'm familiar with. That's more your pathway.
My conclusion is more dollars have to be invested into these pathways and these foundational programs that lead to these athletes going on to fight in the UFC and representing Australia on an international level.
Well, let's do something about it. When Dana White and his crew come to Sydney in the first week of September, let's progress that situation on behalf of Australia and New Zealand. And if potentially the next president of the United States is ringside for UFC as he was yesterday for the Australian invasion of Las Vegas, well, surely a smart politician is going to maximise that and think, well, if it's good enough for Donald Trump, it's good enough for us.
Very questionable because of once you get politics involved, it's over.
Everything's political.
Yeah, but once you start, like, for example, now I have to go down this rabbit hole. Donald Trump Jr.'s tour of Australia got cancelled. Why? Because they approved his visa one night before the event was scheduled. Right? It was sitting in the back of some log of files, and then all of a sudden, one night before, it got approved, and you had a minister on Twitter making fun of him.
Yeah, Claire O'Neill.
As a sore loser, right? And like these tactics are what destroy countries. I don't want to go down this conversation because I want to stick to sport. Okay. These are the tactics that destroy countries. So anyway, we're moving away from this. We're staying on sport, and we're going to keep going. All right. Moving on. These Just Stop Oil protests in Wimbledon are absolutely disgusting. I absolutely have to stop because it's getting out of hand. I mean, all right, we get it. You have some earth-friendly, climate-friendly agenda that you're trying to push, apparently, right? But we don't care. Take it elsewhere. We're here to watch sport. We don't want idiots running on tennis fields throwing around orange bloody, what's it called? What is that called? Confetti during games. Like, how immature is that? What are you trying to prove? The clothes you're wearing, oil is used to manufacture them. What are you talking about? It's just become an absolute joke.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yes, you are right. I'm not sure. Is immature the right word to describe it? So I just think they are directing their energy to the wrong situation. I mean, we saw Australian tennis player Daria Saville. She was mid-game when they ran onto the field and started throwing that confetti airborne, and the disdain on her face was obvious. And I think you're right, people don't want to mix and politicise sports, but for the people who are trying to make a name for themselves and politicise sport through the stopping of oil and through banners and alerting the politicians and the consumers, is that the right way to do it? I don't think it is, but they probably got their point across.
Did they? Is that going to increase people now to stop using oil?
No, I mean, personally, I think I agree with you. I think it is ridiculous to think that they could storm a field, at Wimbledon and make an impact. But they did make an impact. Whether that's right or wrong will be determined.
It's immature because that's not how adults act. We don't chuck tantrums every time we don't get what we want. It's a large part of the problem that we have today. When people don't get what they want, they go throw tantrums. Yeah. There's a way of doing things. There's a civil way. We live in 2023. The world's meant to have progressed and become this.
To be the devil's advocate, Ahmed, how should they do it?
Lobby government, like everybody else is doing with their own agendas. Look at The Voice. look at The Voice now.
Yeah, but the government is running an agenda with The Voice. If the government wants
the same. How did the Voice agenda get there?
Yeah, but if the government wants something done and achieved, they use mainstream media and sport to push their agenda. But if you look at the reverse and they say society wants to oppose this or do that, well, the voice is then taken away.
Go back one step. How did the conversation come up?
I don't know how it emanated, because it certainly wasn't through the Aboriginal community.
It's that union boss, one of their colleagues, who started this whole thing, who's been pushing for 4 years. So anyway, we're not going to get into this. Moral of the story is, you want your point across, go and do it like how everybody else does it. You lobby government, you push, you work. Things don't change overnight. Convince people. Tell us why we should stop using oil. Not because you're having a tantrum and you think it's the right way to do things.
Yeah, look, I agree. And the other thing is this stopping oil, I think in terms of they want to turn the world into a electric zone, they don't know what they're actually talking about. Stopping oil is actually stopping the progress of the economy in the world.
100%. There's many factors that contribute to the use of oil in our societies that people are not even aware of.
Yeah, exactly. And they're using climate change to push this agenda, and they don't know what they're pushing. Climate change is a hoax which was introduced some 30 to 40 years ago by Al Gore, who nearly became the president of the United States. Climate change to me, is a rubbish agenda driven by the elites.
Absolutely. All right, let's keep going. Next up, now, again, the Cronulla Sharks are considering revoking Scott Morrison's number 1 ticket holder tag because of the Robodebt saga. Again, Mr. Morrison at one stage was this hero of Cronulla. He was given the honorary title by the Sharks when he was a treasurer in 2016. And the CEO of the Sharks came out and said, when Morrison was Prime Minister, he goes, it's an honor for us to have the Prime Minister as our number 1 fan, so on and so on. Now this Robodebt saga comes up, and they've thrown him under they're about to throw him under the bus.
Well, they essentially have.
Yeah, well, why is this the case? Like, why do he's got his own issues, he's got his own problems, right? Do we forget everything he's done for the club in the past?
Well, it certainly is a pylon, but in terms of clubs having the number 1 ticket holders, it's merely a invisible tag that is agenda driven so that the clubs can use that number 1 ticket holder to further a political agenda.
Yeah.
Which
seems to be that.
Yeah. You know what? Look, Scott Morrison's probably done quite a lot for the Cronulla Sharks. He's been an avid supporter, even in the top job running Australia as the chief of this country. We often saw him in the crowd at Shark Park down in the Shire. You know, he wears their scarves and their hats, and he's an obvious supporter. It's a bit like Russell Crowe with South Sydney, they believe. But in terms of Robodebt and the pushback, we've seen some Australians take their own lives as a result of Robodebt. And the Prime Minister, the ex-Prime Minister Scott Morrison, was at the helm when this all took place, and now he is trying to exonerate himself. So in the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday, I think it came out that Cronulla was looking at removing Scott Morrison as the number 1 ticket holder. They then spoke with Scott Morrison's press secretary, who denied it and said that he was looking at relinquishing the position. Where do we stand?
Interesting. Well, there you go. So now all of a sudden he's looking to walking away too.
Well, look, it's just it's a political shit fight for whatever word. And, you know, is he better off to stand down? But then it could be perceived as guilt in terms of the Robodebt saga. Again,
politics and sport don't mix. Let us watch sport and move on. Okay, moving on. AFL nude data breach. There's been a lot of talk around this over the last, let's say, 7 to 10 days. For those of you that don't know, a Google Drive folder was sent around with 45 folders of different athletes, AFL players, with very incriminating images, nudes, and different. I don't want to go into too much detail, but like I wouldn't want it to be me, because definitely would have felt. I can't even find a word to bloody describe it. But anyway, disturbing, very, very disturbing. Somebody's organised this. Somebody's put it all together. We don't know who yet. The AFL stands on
one person.
Sorry, mate?
It could be more than one person.
Oh, for sure. It has to be a group of people that have come together and done this, because it's a massive task within itself. But how did we get here, Tony? Like, how do we have 45 players, some of them Brownlow medalists, some of them chairmen of boards and board members and greats of the game? How do they make themselves so vulnerable?
Well, look, to be honest, I think a lot of people would like to know and have asked the question, how do these AFL stars end up on a Google file in a state of undress? There are some very compromising images, and for those who haven't seen them, they are some of them bordering on disgusting. I mean, as you said, we're not going to go into explicit detail, but if I was one of the 45 players, I would be incredibly embarrassed. So it comes back to our previous discussion, Ahmed, off camera. Who is at fault here? Is it the players for potentially bringing the game into disrepute, or is it the person who has leaked the images?
I think both are, because a player should know better than to give somebody this sort of access. And the person who's leaked the images, he's been entrusted with somebody's very private life.
Yeah, but
know enough not to.
Yeah, but is it a hack? I mean, we know celebrities from around the globe have had their phones hacked through the cloud. Is it a hack? Is it somebody who has collated all these images? Is it a few girls who have got together? A few boys who have got together? We don't know anybody's specific type. It just, no one can put their finger on how this emanated and where it's going to go.
Let's put it this way: it's definitely shocked the AFL world, where we will hear things in the coming weeks. Luckily, the AFL's got a very good relationship with Google, and they instructed them to take it all down, which they did.
Understandably,
so, very convenient.
Oh yeah, but Armin, should the AFL sweep it under the carpet, or should they allow the authorities to investigate how this happened?
The AFL needs to let the authorities to do their work.
Yeah, but why? So what's the breach here? Is it revenge porn? Is it stupidity? Is it a mixture of both? Is it a hack? Some people have even thrown up the suggestion of AI.
It could be. It could be. That in today's world, that's very, very possible. One thing I would say is this. At the end of the day, there's no crime committed by the players. There's social and cultural embarrassments, but crimes, there's no crimes. There's guilt because of they're part of families, wild relationships, and so on and so on. At the end of the day, they have to have a hard look at themselves and say, my honour, my dignity, it's gone down the drain in this process. How do I reclaim both? The AFL needs to let the authorities do their work. They need to get to the bottom of this so they understand. If they don't work it out now, this is going to be a problem moving forward.
Oh, but proven a day it will be.
Yeah, because now, if let's say it is AI, what happens in the future when this happens again? How do we stamp it out? How do we address it?
No, but we don't need to stamp it out. I think players need to be smarter. We're not going to stop males and females sending
leaks. We're not talking about.
No, but then it becomes revenge porn.
Yeah,
what people want to know is it wasn't one or two or three players. It was a collation of 45 players in a state of undress. And I know that it had such an effect on two players from the weekend that both ended up injured.
Conveniently injured or just injured?
No. Look, I'm no psychologist, but my philosophy would be due to the release of these images that the psychology of the players was then affected and therefore it manifested into an injury.
Could be. So what's obvious is this, right? So we don't keep, ragging on. What's obvious is this. This was an organised effort by a group of something or someone or somebodies, right? And what needs to happen is we need to understand why it's happened, how it's happened for the future. And it needs to be dealt with.
Okay, so should there be penalty?
For the players or for those that are exposed?
Either or.
Players, no.
And for the persons who leaked it?
Depends. Is it a crime to leak these things? I'm not a law professional.
No, you don't have to be, but it is. I mean, because if a player's image of this magnitude is leaked and publicised, well, yes, it is.
So how come the media is not punished when they go and look for these things on people?
No,
just expose them and destroy it.
No, because the media is doing its job.
And so what? So what's the difference?
No, but if the media has come across these explicit images, why should they hide them?
No, there's investigative journalists who purposely go out of their way to find things on people who become public figures to literally destroy and bring them down the barrel because they have a different opinion, they have a different narrative to them. I don't see them getting what's called.
What?
Getting,
All those roles?
Well, nobody holds them accountable.
Who, the media?
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And you know what? I think they do it
all the time.
I've been a part of the media for 25 years, and I think we need to be held accountable. The other thing is we investigate politicians, sports people, celebrities, the general public, and we are almost untouchable.
Exactly. So, like, for Brendan Favola and that whole thing that he had with that young girl, I can't remember her name now, Lara Bingle and so on. Like, he had videos of him exposed to the media, and the media they put it everywhere.
Yeah,
like,
because
how's that any different?
We hold our sports stars to very high standards. So we push them up to pull them down.
If you're going to incriminate this person who's leaked this, you've got to start incriminating media too, because it's the same thing.
I totally agree. And I think now, you and I have discussed this at length, on and off camera, is that the media now, the mainstream media, is no longer untouchable.
It's becoming irrelevant day by day.
I wouldn't say irrelevant, but certainly the mainstream media's power is not what it used to be.
Of course it's becoming irrelevant. When you have
US
elections...
No, but it's not irrelevant. It's just they don't hold the same power.
All right. Are they becoming less relevant?
Less relevant, not irrelevant.
They're becoming more and more irrelevant. I didn't say they are irrelevant.
No. Well, the terminology would be less relevant, not irrelevant.
Okay. Less relevant. Day by day. Moving on. The AFL media, the AFL buy round, that now has gone from one round, what it used to be, to now it goes over to like 3 or 4 different rounds. And it's become a really interesting few weeks. I think it's really destroyed the momentum of rounds. You feel like there's always something missing.
I agree.
You feel like there's empty slots, especially when you're hardcore fans like ourselves. You watch pretty much every single game.
Yes.
Hey?
We try to. Yes, we do.
You know what I mean. Like, we're actively engaged, checking the scores, who won, who didn't, so on and so on. So what we're seeing now is that it's become a thing where these executives go overseas, send us photos of their holidays, and the media covers it, and they talk about it for weeks on hand.
Yeah, well, Ahmed, as we've discussed, who was the buy round for? I mean, it's not. I've seen one AFL player go overseas. I think Mason Cox made it to Bali in the first week of the buy round. I think it was for 4 days. So the clubs are worried about their players recovering. So they give them enough time to fly interstate, to not indulge in the AFL and to be away from the footy club. But it just seems to be that this buy farce seems to be created for the CEOs and the board members of the respective clubs to travel to Europe. We saw the outgoing AFL CEO over in Paris for a friend's wedding. Now, I don't begrudge Gil McLachlan whatsoever for attending his mate's wedding in France, but all these other CEOs and board members and people connected to the football world seem to be travelling to Europe in the middle of a football season. Now, this has been something that the industry has been crying foul over for as long as I can remember, wanting to travel to Europe and the United States for the northern summer, whereas we're stuck in Melbourne for our winter, which is ostensibly freezing cold. So who are we actually supporting here? The players want to go to Europe as much as anybody else. Why can't they?
Absolutely. Look. Honestly, at this stage, the way it's set up, I don't see enough reason and logic why it has to happen over such a long period of time. I've said to you off camera as well. Why wouldn't you make this week a huge week, a spectacle, an event, and an opportunity to grow the game in a different state? Launch a mid-season draft, have all 18 teams relevant and present there, not players, just the organisations, and turn it into a bit of a spectacle, an event that people can come to. People can meet these different teams that hold events, activities, make the mid-season draft a bit of an event, like they do in different leagues around the world, and broadcast it. Give your partner something else to broadcast, make it interesting. That's it. There's a break. There's a week. AFL is still relevant during that week, and fans are still engaged.
I totally agree with the entertainment value. If we are to, using Queensland as an example, so the 18 teams can move up to Queensland to get some sunshine, to get some vitamin D, to get out of the Melbourne and Sydney and South Australian, West Australian bubbles. It would be good for the competition. But by extension of that, I don't want a mid-season draft. Yes, the entertainment value would supersede anything, but I don't see the mid-season draft working unless, as I said to you last week, the only way I could see it working, if a player who hasn't played in the seniors for an AFL club is to seek a trade to another club, potentially. But I don't want to see Mason Cox having a bad year and then Collingwood says, well, we're going to let him go. We've lost Brodie Grundy. We don't see the value of Ruckman, and he can go to Hawthorn or whoever it may be who is seeking a Ruckman. If it's somebody from the state leagues in the southern states, yeah, I can see that happening. But I don't want to see a player who has played in the ones play for another team in order for them to win a premiership.
I absolutely disagree with you. I think it'll be one of the most amazing things for the league. I think AFL clubs will be able to, for once, actually bolster their list when they're hit and ravaged by injuries. I think that we need to move on in the world and move with the times. In today's world, the AFL essentially is an entertainment product. Why have they changed all the rules around making the game faster, less contact? It's more focused on speed, go, faster game, more entertaining game. Because at the end of the day, the broadcasters, that's what they want. That's their way of engaging people. Why wouldn't you let AFL teams field the best possible team that they can and give them the best chance of winning a premiership?
I'm not interested because it breeds disloyalty. And by extension of what you're saying, how many times has soccer, tennis, NRL, any of the other sports change their rules? They don't. The AFL changes rules every year. It's borderline ridiculous.
Because those sports make adjustments. Of course they do.
Oh, no, not to the point that the AFL does. The AFL changes rules.
What changes has the AFL made that are really drastically? I mean, yes, they've made some.
They've made a lot. The 6-6 rule. They've made the kicking out of bounds rule.
Yeah.
They've made the pushing the back, and then they've made the changes to the interchange bench. It is never ending.
This is off field, though, right? This is more with the player transfers and so on and so on. This is what we're talking about. Build that culture.
From the NBA and the NFL in terms of player movement, we just leave it as is. They play for the one club for the 23 rounds, and then if they're no good or they want to move, they do it at the end of the season.
What's the ultimate goal of every single club?
To win a premiership.
Okay. What's the ultimate? Why do these broadcasters come and do these huge billion-dollar deals with the AFL?
They don't do it for a mid-season draft. We saw last week in the NRL or the week before. No. Last week we saw in the NRL, in Australia's rugby league competition, that St George Illawarra's Ben Hunt indicated to his club that he wanted to seek a transfer to the Brisbane Broncos. Now, the St George Illawarra refused the trade, and NRL CEO Andrew Abdo said publicly it was a complete farce as to how this trade period had gone, and he didn't want to see this. It takes away from, one, the club, and two, the competition. Why are we talking about Ben Hunt, who wants to trade mid-season? Well, he can wait till the end of the year, and then he can see out the season with his current club, St George Illawarra, rather than going, oh, well, I'm potentially the best player in the red and white of St George, and I want to go to the Broncos.
Did the trade happen?
Go on.
Did the trade happen?
No, it didn't. They knocked it on the head.
Why?
Because St George Illawarra held him to his contract.
So why is that any different with the AFL?
Because I don't want to see players turning around mid-season going, well, I've had enough of coach A, B and C, and I want to move to this club because they're potentially offering me a greater outcome. They can wait till the end of the year.
But salary caps are salary caps. They're
I'm not in the salary cap in this argument. What about, as I said to you last week?
It's a part of the conversation because there's only so much that can be transferred elsewhere.
Yeah, but okay, what about
in the middle of the year?
Paddy Mills, to us and the rest of the Australians, has always been a San Antonio Spurs player. Now, in the past 4 weeks, he's had 3 different clubs and he's in danger of losing an NBA contract.
Different scenario altogether.
Well, but it's not because he's changed. So people then turn around and go, it affects merchandise, and they recognise a player in those colours.
At the end of the day, the AFL exists, the teams exist to win premierships and flags. They exist to put the best possible 22 that they can have out there. So their fans enjoy watching the game, so on and so on. Is it better I have the ability to bolster my squad, or is it better to I stay in the bottom 8 for bloody 5, 6, 7 years? Where, sometimes the difference is the Bulldogs finished 8th in 2016, won the flag.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you an example. What if Jack Silvani says, oh, look, you know what, I'm not really liking Michael Voss at the moment. I'm not playing the position I want to play. Comes to round 11 and says, I want to go to the Brisbane Lions. And then they win a premiership.
But the Lions won't accept him based off that argument because he's going to bring that culture there anyway. So he's going to bring a poisonous culture across.
You're missing my point. I mean, he could go to Port Adelaide. He could go anywhere. I'm just saying, I'm using Jack Silvani as a hypothetical.
What I'm trying to say to you is this. Clubs are not stupid, right? They're only going to bring people across who are going to add value. People like that are selfish and they care about themselves. They're not going to go elsewhere and do anything different. Because to be different and make a difference, you got to identify the problem, and the problem starts with you, not with the people around you, right? That's what I'm trying to say. All it does is it gives somebody else an opportunity, especially from the second tier leagues, the VFL, the Waffle, the Soundful, these sorts of organisations that don't really have these players that perform really well, don't really have an avenue in because first of all they're too old. And they're overlooked because there's so many players that come through the traditional draft. And the rookie draft has become a draft where players go from other clubs to other clubs, the ones that are delisted, they keep them in the system, so on, so on, so on. So that's all I'm saying. It's a bolster up for clubs that have a lot of injuries, clubs that think that they can bring in different players that can bolster their squads and make a run for the flag.
Okay, well, that being said, and you brought up the other day about James Podsiadly, who was brought in as a mature age recruit. Now, I'm happy with that. I think he was recruited from Werribee in the VFL. Correct me if I'm wrong. And he ended up becoming a premiership player with Geelong. He was a very good player. I think he kicked 104 goals in 5 years, which is an incredible feat for a mature age rookie who I think was drafted at 26. Exactly. That I'm okay with, but I don't want to see a mid-season trade or draft period for current listed AFL players. If you want to bring somebody in from, the second tier leagues or the third tier leagues, by all means.
But that could be done with these restrictions in place. That's what I'm trying to say to you. Like, we can launch a draft and have certain rules in place. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a free for all, right? All right, we'll keep going. We'll agree to disagree. Next talking point is our NRL media boycott. This is a really interesting one because NRL executives are facing a lot of difficult conversations and decisions that need to be made in the, I'd say, next few months, considering these negotiations have been going on for 20 months, right? So what we're seeing now is players are refusing to speak with the media pre the state of origin. They're not interested. They're officially boycotting. Players believe they deserve more of a share of the revenue that is received from these broadcasters. What are your thoughts, Tony?
Look, I think the players should be compensated, Ahmed, and whether they are or they aren't is obviously a murky discussion. I mean, I think the players are the people who put the show on, and I think they should be compensated. Now, to what percentile overall of the broadcast rights, I don't know. I think is it around somewhere between 28 and 32%?
The AFL is. The NRL is around the 50% mark.
Yeah, well, 50% is quite a lot. All I can say is nice. I quoted when you and I spoke the other day, Canberra Raiders coach Ricky Stewart said publicly at a press conference last week, 95% of the playing group don't know why they're striking and refusing to speak with the media. And I think that speaks volumes. But then by extension of that, if you look at it from an AFL point of view, and I know that the players are currently dealing with the CBA, 23 years ago, the great Wayne Carey was the highest paid player by the length of the street. And I think it's been publicised that he was earning $1.4 million in 1999. Now, 23 years on, our highest paid player is earning that same amount of money. Yes, the average player wage has risen, which I think is now close to $400,000 a year. But if our greatest player was earning the same amount back in 1999 as they do in 2023, what does that say about the progression of the game? Not a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Cost of living was a lot less back then. I mean,
and
no one knew what they are now.
Yeah, and if you look at the CEO in 1999 would have been earning somewhere in the vicinity of, you would think, around $1 million. Now the current CEO is earning, I think, in excess of $3.5 million. So why does his salary jump exponentially and the players don't?
Doesn't make sense, really. I mean, in all fairness, the average wage has gone up in these leagues, but the top end hasn't. They've really restricted that. Well, that's because of the salary cap. I mean,
well, change it.
That's what it comes down to. The salary cap is what holds it all together.
Ahmed, and I've been saying this for a long time. Our very good players in the AFL, I think, even as a whole, I think AFL players are underpaid.
Yeah, they are. They really are. For what their body goes through, they are underpaid.
No, but even the entertainment value, they are underpaid.
For sure. If you look at different codes, the NBA athletes earn 51%. The NFL earns 48%. The AFL is at 28, looking to go to 32. I mean, I'm all for players earning more, but we have to be within reason, right? We have to be practical about things. Now, the nitty-gritty details about what they're really complaining about, other than money as a whole, hasn't really been released. But what we're seeing is that what we have to keep in mind is that we have to think of, we can't give too much one way or the other. We have to be balanced in how we do things. We can't let this little privileged society that's out there at the moment pushing this privilege agenda to come in and say, oh, no, they deserve more, but so on, so on, so on. Right? I'm with you. They should be paid more. Maybe increase salary caps. Maybe move different, budgets around. Instead of spending money into, let's say, benefits of this, say, all right, if we're going to pay you more, you can't get this because we have to take the money away from somewhere. Or we can't grow our teams next year, or we can't grow into different markets, right? So there has to be some sort of compromise and reason here. Otherwise, it's going to become a trend. Every league's going to go through this, and we're going to end up, just fighting things out. Boycotts, they do nothing. Well, they don't really improve the game.
Do we privatise some of the clubs in all sports? So a portion of the NRL, the A-League, the AFL goes into private ownership.
Look, privatisation will have to happen sooner or later for these leagues, for these players to get paid what they want to get paid. Because the way the current structures are, the salary caps and so on, it's just not possible.
Okay,
there's restrictions everywhere.
Your knowledge of international sport is exceptional. The Denver Nuggets won their first NBA championship around 3 to 4 weeks ago. Now, Nikola Jokic was the MVP of the series, the MVP of the finals. Incredible.
Yeah.
Now, the Denver Nuggets are a privatised team. Tell me about his structure.
Stan Kroenke is the owner of the Denver Nuggets. who also owns Arsenal FC and owns the LA Rams, and also owns an NHL team, owns a PLL team too, which can't remember the top of my head. I'm not sure about Jokic's pay structure, but he's earning tens of millions of dollars a year, right? But in fairness to him, NBA is international sport. The media rights are like they're trying to get a 10-year deal at $90-something billion.
With ESPN?
Yeah, with their current partners, yeah. And the NFL's already got a $100 billion deal over the next 10 years. So they're definitely leaders when it comes to TV rights, and as an organization, they know how to make money from every little thing that they own and hold. Now, I always say you've got to compare apples with apples. The NBA is not the same. Like we said, international, more sponsorship revenue, more broadcast revenue, more, right? But what they do well is they engage players from countries all around the world, and then they get their fan bases from those countries engaged into the game, right? The AFL, the NRL hasn't really done that. They've been so stuck in this region of the world, they haven't spent enough in expanding their games and bringing in that additional revenue. Another thing they do is they get really crafty with their contracts. Okay, I feel like we're very robotic here with how we do things. We don't get innovative and creative. Like a lot of these players would have deals with sponsorship brands and so on outside what's happening on as part of their on-field contracts. If we do that here, hell will break loose. They'll say this salary, that, become a disaster.
Yeah, but it's ridiculous. Like in terms of cash converters have been sponsoring the 7 networks AFL broadcast, and also they have individual sponsorships with a certain amount of players, be it Christian Petrarca, Toby Green, Cameron Ling, and one or two others whose names escape me. But my understanding is they were paid as little as $10,000 or $15,000. That is chicken feed. These players should be paid 6-figure sums to be promoting these businesses.
100%. And because these guys are national stars, the AFL is the biggest league in the country, and 100% they should start to get paid. Yeah, they should be remunerated based off that, like the presence that they have, a part of the code that they are involved in, being the stars they are. So tens of millions of people watch games every single week in Australia. I think the AFL has 1 million members, 1 million plus members Australia-wide. But so that just tells you we're a population of 25 million people. It's huge. Anyway, let's not digress. So overall, our conversation started about the NRL boycotts, the media boycotts based on pay or play. My conclusion is yes, but let's get creative. Let's do things differently. Let's not be so rigid, right? Let's look at different partnerships and deals that we can do outside just the on-field stuff. Look at more the off-field stuff and remunerate these players.
Yeah, look, I'm actually for the AFL players. Sorry, I'm actually for the NRL players in boycotting the media. In terms of, I think for so many years, the media, the players, the clubs, the governing bodies, basically pushed into a cycle. This is what happens. This is what we should do, and this is what should happen. Whereas the landscape is evolving now daily. Media is changing. Players are changing. The situation through broadcast and players is changing every day. So for the players to boycott, which I think started as early as this weekend's round, and then will lead into the State of Origin, where they've banned all pre-game, during game and post-game interviews. Well, why can't they do that? If it's something they believe in strongly enough, who are we to stop them? Instead of old journalists, 45 plus, who are writing agenda-driven pieces either by their corporation and or the league, and or they feel like it's a slight on them. Why can't? But just because something's taken place for the last 120 years, why does it have to take place for the next 50 to 100 years? What's wrong with opposing current situations? Freedom of speech, we have been complaining about forever and a day, and then suddenly people want freedom of speech, and then they don't like it.
Absolutely. I mean, we can agree to disagree on some points. Overall, we are in agreement that players should be paid more. How it's done, we might disagree to a certain extent.
No, good on them. I'm all for the NRL players striking, and to whatever level that means, go back to the broadcaster and the governing body and say, we will come to a negotiation, but don't treat us like fools.
I guess so. All right, awesome. Let's keep going. Moving on to our last talking point. This one's a really interesting one because it involves the old and the new, really. The Channel 10 media rights, Spring Carnival, the Spring Carnival media rights. So last year, Channel 10 thought it was a good idea to bring in Eddie McGuire to try and boost the ratings. Did it work? Did it, Tony?
No, it didn't. And we know how much of a consummate professional and TV performer Eddie is, being one of the best in the country, and even he couldn't spike the ratings for the 10 network. The deal, I think, which was done in 2018 for 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23, was 100 million over 5 years. Correct me if I'm wrong for those figures, but that's what we believe if we are to believe what we read. And Channel 10, according to the Australian newspaper, has been removed from the bidding process for the TV rights for 2024 and beyond. Now, this is for the 4-day Flemington Carnival, and it's obviously the jewel of the crown in regards to the VRC. It's worth a hell of a lot of money. Ratings go around the world, but 10 on the back of the Australians' breaking news turned around, and then their reasoning was that the VRC wanted to go down a more a pure horse racing and wagering type broadcast, and entertainment wouldn't be thought of as highly as the other two situations. So that was 10's excuse. I'm not sure that I believe it, but certainly if we are to believe what we read, 10 won't be allowed to pitch for next year's rights.
Yeah, this is another fall from grace for Channel 10. We've just seen them really drop off. Not sure why they're doing this and why they have come to where they have come, but their streaming network on Paramount is hopeless when it comes to live sports. They really struggle.
Soccer, like international soccer?
Yeah, I mean, all the soccer events and so on Paramount, a lot of the times the app is still crashing, the streaming cuts off, it buffers, so on and so on. So people are really struggling, and I really believe that 10 has found it really hard to catch up and become a part of the modern day streaming services. Like, Foxtel's done very well through KO and Binge, but they've really struggled. So all the best to them moving forward, but I think they're on a very, very, very dark path.
Yeah, look, I'm disappointed in 10. I thought they could have done a lot better with their promotion and broadcasting of the A-League Grand Final. And now you're in Melbourne, which is sports mad. I'm in Sydney, which is not as sports mad. But anyway, I just thought there was a real lack of promotion. There wasn't enough invested into the announcement of the grand final. Not enough people knew what was going on. I mean, I remember being back in 2006, 7 and 8. I was at the 7 Network as a sports journalist, and Melbourne victory was the biggest ticket item in the state. I mean, yes, the AFL is always going to be number one, but the amount of victory fans, and I can't remember what year they won the A-League Grand Final, but Marvel Stadium was packed to the rafters. It encapsulated the entire town.
I was there at a few of them. Most of the Melbourne Victory Grand Finals, I was there. You have fans walking through the streets chanting different anthems. It was almost like you were in England watching Liverpool fans walking towards Anfield. It was unbelievable, right? That's all dead now.
It is, and I coincide that with Frank Lowy and the Lowy family leaving the A-League. I mean, what they did for soccer in this country is nothing short of amazing. And you and I spoke in regards to certain players across the league being household names. I mean, we would see it on the news almost every night about A-League soccer. Now you struggle to even get on the 10 network, and they're the broadcaster. So where are the Kevin Muskets and Archie Thompsons and the Del Pieros, the recruits? Yeah, correct. I mean, household names in regards to the A-League, yesterday's heroes.
Yeah, look, the coverage, the deal they did with the A-League was hyped up to be meant to be a great deal, but unfortunately it hasn't worked out so far. I hope they can turn around. Big fan of soccer, big fan of sports in general, and I like to see Codes prosper and succeed. But the management team at the A-League hasn't helped themselves either. So anyway.
That's very good.
No, absolutely. I mean, soccer in this country is all built on communities, and they've killed that community aspect. They're trying to make it a corporate league like the AFL and the NRL. It's not going to work. It never will work. You can try as much as you want. You can only get so much government funding, and you can only get so many grants. At the end of the day, these communities are what build these clubs. Look, all over the world, they're built around communities, right? If they're not engaged, you'll never have the core following to drive you through those hard moments where your team is not succeeding. You'll never have the passion involved. Yes, they can get a bit crazy, but that's what security is there, police is there. Put them in place, make things happen, and you will see the game grow and prosper. Yep. But that pretty much brings us to the end of our episode. It's been an absolute blast, Tony. We've gone on and spoken about many interesting topics. For everyone listening, we thank you all very much. Tony, give us some final words.
Well, you put me on the spot here, Armin. You're just going to have to wait for my beautiful words during the next episode.
All right, then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Tony. Take care, everyone. We'll catch you all on the next episode of Raw Sports.